I wanted to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your support over the last 5 years. We've grown into an enthusiastic international team of 15 people. We've loved producing battle map animations for you, and we love hearing how much you enjoy them. We do our absolute best to offer accurate and unbiased recreations of the most important battles and operations of the 20th and 21st century. I hope we've done a relatively good job of this. However, you may have seen among fellow history creators that views on long-form history content across the board are much reduced from even 12 months ago. The YouTube algorithm, which recommends our videos to people who might be interested in watching them, has been updated in a way which intentionally or otherwise suppresses recommendations of history content. With a team of people relying on the monetization that comes from views, and with fewer views with which to negotiate with sponsors, without which we can't produce videos full stop, this has become a major problem for us. Shorts, and YouTube's own ads, which we don't receive any revenue from, also now take up valuable space on the YouTube homepage that would ordinarily be used to recommend long-form content. YouTube's demonetization bots have now run completely out of control, with our second channel, The Intel Report, having been recently completely demonetized by mistake, only to be eventually reinstated after 2 appeals. We continue to be censored from mentioning certain words, people, events, and topics. You may have seen the farcical lengths that we had to go to in a recent video on the reasons for the Iraq War to not mention naughty words. With that in mind, this video is sponsored by our Patreon. We're uploading videos completely ad and sponsor free. We've launched a new Patreon exclusive Q&A series. I intend to also use Patreon as an exclusive release platform for any videos which get demonetized on YouTube. Absolutely no pressure at all, but if you'd like to support us to be able to continue making videos, it would be amazing. Please take a look at patreon.com/the operations room. That's patreon.com/the operations room. No problem at all if you aren't able to support us financially. We appreciate all your support since April 2019. At just past 4 PM on the 1st of March 1942, the Clemson-class destroyer USS Edsall is underway towards the last known position of the oiler USS Pecos. Her commander, Lieutenant Joshua Nix, is tasked with rescuing any survivors she may encounter from an engagement the USS Pecos is feared to have been part of. As Edsall sails towards Pecos' last position, the tranquil peace is shattered by a salvo of Japanese fire that smashes into the water behind her. Unbeknownst to Lieutenant Nix, he has sailed into the jaws of the Kido Butai, the Imperial Japanese Navy's aircraft carrier-based mobile striking force. His fate, and that of his ship, now lie in the balance, one heavily weighted against him. By March, the Allied position in the Pacific theatre is teetering on a knife edge, and further Japanese conquests are likely. The Empire of Japan had already led a devastating campaign across the Pacific, consuming Singapore, British Malaya, and huge swathes of the Philippines. So swift and successful were their advances that Japanese commanders opened another front against the Netherlands East Indies, and by the 1st of March, even this conquest is entering its closing stages after an extensive and lightning-fast island-hopping campaign. The Joint Allied Command, ABTACOM, previously administering the defence of Southeast Asia, has all but disintegrated. Japanese forces will soon begin their landings on the Netherlands East Indies' final bastion of Java. Along Java's southern shore is the crucially important port of Cilacap, where supplies and reinforcements come ashore, and where warships like Edsall operate from, escorting fleets and merchantmen to and from Australia. On the 26th of February, Edsall and another Clemson-class destroyer, the USS Whipple, sailed to rendezvous with the seaplane tender, the USS Langley, destined for Java with a consignment of P-40E Kitty Hawks and 33 US Army Air Force personnel. A day later, just as the Battle of the Java Sea raged far to the north, the USS Langley was discovered and attacked by aircraft of the Takao Kokutai from the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service, operating out of the recently occupied island of Bali. As a result of this encounter, the Langley was so badly damaged that the decision was taken to scuttle her, whilst her crew was taken aboard the destroyers Edsall and Whipple. On the following day, the two destroyers rendezvoused with another ship, this time the USS Pecos, an oiler, off Flying Fish Cove, Christmas Island. The Pecos, under the command of Commander Elba Abernethy, had departed Cilacap with several wounded already aboard from the USS Houston, Marblehead and Stewart due to earlier engagements, and were ordered to collect those survivors from Langley before delivering them to Australia. As the three ships rendezvoused and preparations were made to transfer Langley's survivors to the Pecos, the force was discovered by Japanese bombers heading for Christmas Island, and though not the target nor under attack, the three ships hastened to the safety of a rain squall out in the open sea. knowing that their position had undoubtedly been noted and reported. It wouldn't be until the early hours of the 1st of March when the USS Pecos took the survivors from the two destroyers. With the exchange complete, Edsall began its journey north. It's during this journey that she receives countermanding orders. From Rear Admiral William Glassford, the senior US naval officer in ABDICOM, all US naval forces are to evacuate Java and make for a rendezvous point to the south, a point he doesn't realise is compromised to the Japanese. The Pecos, however, is ordered to continue on to Australia. In this direction, however, lies the Kido Butai, who last reared its head at the devastating raid on Darwin in northern Australia, and have now moved west towards Christmas Island. With new orders, Edsall turns south towards the rendezvous point, when, at 10 AM, the USS Pecos is located by a single aircraft with a distinguishing feature, non-retractable landing gear. As lookouts aboard the Pecos identify it to be a Val bomber, they know this means only one thing: the feared Kido Butai must be nearby. Within a matter of minutes, the Kido Butai begin to launch strike aircraft, and, within 2 hours, the attack Commander Abernethy is fearing arrives. Arriving first, 6 Val dive bombers from the carrier Kaga dive one at a time onto the oiler. Pecos, with her 5 and 3-inch guns, throw up a ferocious defence. According to Japanese accounts, the Pecos superbly avoided our bombs. Of the 6 bombs dropped, only 1 hits the ship. After an hour's respite, 6 more Vals from the carrier Soryu appear, attacking in a similar pattern, and despite the Pecos' best efforts, her impaired mobility allows the bombers to score 4 direct hits. Despite now being badly damaged, the Pecos fights on, extinguishing her fires, correcting her list, and bringing her radios back online. But it won't last. At 2:45 PM, 18 dive bombers from Akagi and Hiryu arrive overhead. As the 9 Vals from Hiryu dive onto the Pecos, her anti-aircraft guns, now manned almost entirely by untrained volunteers, throw up a volume of anti-aircraft fire so great and disruptive that it unnerves arguably the best dive bomber pilots in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Each of their bombs misses. Just as they complete their passes, the Akagi's 9 dive bombers begin their own attack. Like Hiryu's aircraft, most of their bombs miss. However, the 8th bomb dropped does land close to her hull, causing a breach and uncontrollable flooding. Commander Abernethy knows his ship is destined to sink, and so issues the order to abandon ship. With the attack still ongoing, Pecos radios distress signals and position reports, with the last transmission going out at 3:38 PM. Pecos sinks 10 minutes later, and her crew end up in the water, as do the survivors from the USS Langley for a second time. Whether Edsall hears the distress calls is unknown but likely. As Pecos and Langley's survivors are drifting in the water as sunset approaches, they begin to hear the sounds of a naval battle in the distance. Some survivors will be rescued overnight, but 500 will drown. The USS Edsall is steaming to their rescue. She herself has now been spotted. A returning Val dive bomber, one of Akagi's, likely from the bombing of Pecos itself, radios to the Kido Butai that they have spotted a light cruiser some 16 miles to the Kido Butai's flank. As more information is gathered on the as of yet unidentified USS Edsall, she is loosely identified as the cruiser USS Marblehead, a light cruiser long coveted by the Japanese for proving immensely difficult to sink. This supposed identification reaches Vice Admiral Nagumo, who is angered, taken aback by how an American light cruiser has been able to get within 16 miles of his force without being detected beforehand. Without hesitation, he orders the battleships Hiei and Kirishima of Battleship Division 3 and the cruisers Chikuma and Tone of Cruiser Division 8 to intercept. Within 10 minutes, lookouts aboard the Chikuma spot the USS Edsall, and orders are hastily barked to her 8-inch batteries. At a range of 12,000 yards, Chikuma opens fire. Driven by a desire to resolve the threat promptly, Rear Admiral Abe orders his cruisers to advance at flank speed. As plumes of water shoot into the sky around his destroyer, Lieutenant Nix relays contact reports to all available commands. These messages are never received. Nix and the Edsall are all alone. The shells of the 2 heavy cruisers crash into the water, and the Edsall begins to maneuver. Watching as the two heavy cruisers advance, Nix orders his destroyer to deploy smoke while she begins an exhaustive pattern of maneuvers from port to starboard, and from flank speed to full stops. Nix is pushing his destroyer to the limits, but in doing so is keeping his crew alive. Aboard Chikuma and Tone, their gunners struggle to train their guns onto the destroyer, thwarted by her maneuvers and smokescreens. As his heavy cruisers continue to miss, Rear Admiral Abe requests the aid of Rear Admiral Junichi Mikawa's battleships. He is all too happy to oblige. At 28,000 yards, Hiei's 14-inch batteries open heavy fire, quickly followed by Kirishima. Together, however, their entrance is just as anticlimactic as Chikuma's, as their shells fall short of the nimble destroyer. Frustrated by her poor gunnery, Hiei launches 3 float planes in an effort to support her gunnery crews. As the aircraft rise and begin to relay information back to the Hiei, the Edsall continues its unpredictable pattern of maneuvers. What makes this even more impressive, and entirely unknown to the Japanese, is that Edsall is already reeling from earlier damages caused by a premature depth charge explosion that limited her speed and maneuverability. The Japanese crews could be forgiven for thinking she was in perfect operational health, as she performs her maneuvers unfazed and seemingly unhindered, gliding through the incoming fire with ease. Angered more and more by their disappointing gunnery, Rear Admiral Abe's heavy cruisers continue to chase the Edsall, whilst Rear Admiral Mikawa's battleships move to encircle the pesky destroyer. Aware of this, yet undeterred, Lieutenant Nix's destroyer continues to bob and weave as hundreds of shells fall into the waters around him. In recollections of the battle, Japanese commanders will compliment the nimble and manic movements her captain is guiding her through, as he continues to thwart salvo after salvo. His movements are made even more effective by the constant employment of smokescreens, which have shielded his vessel from Tone for almost 40 minutes. The Chikuma, however, does maintain sight and fire on the Edsall. As Tone finally spots her through the smoke, she brings her guns to bear. Lookouts aboard the heavy cruiser finally question whether the Edsall is the Marblehead after all. It doesn't take them long to correctly re-identify her as a destroyer. Still embarrassed by the poor performance of his gunners, Rear Admiral Mikawa orders his ships to aggressively close the distance. Noticing their change in tempo and direction, Lieutenant Nix embodies the mantra, "Don't give up the ship," and responds in kind. Without much other option, Nix issues simple and aggressive orders: turn towards the Japanese vessels and charge. As the ship's bow glides to port, her 4-inch batteries ignite, and her torpedo tubes spark into action. Described by Japanese observers as being like a dancing mouse, Edsall completes her turn and follows her torpedoes towards Chikuma, continuing to fire her guns and bob and weave. Aboard the Japanese ship, her crew is taken aback by Edsall's aggression. The torpedoes scream towards the heavy cruiser but narrowly miss. As dusk approaches, over 1,000 rounds have splashed into the waters around her, with only one believed to have hit. As news of the Edsall's defiance reaches Vice Admiral Nagumo, and with the embarrassment of his escorts, he decides enough is enough. Looking to hold on to his force's string of successes, Nagumo orders his carriers to launch their aircraft into the fading light. From the Kaga, Hiryu and Soryu, 26 Val dive bombers take to the sky and turn for the slippery destroyer, each armed with a 550-pound bomb. As Nagumo's aircraft race towards the Edsall, she continues still to bob and weave, interspeeding her movement with one smokescreen after another. It isn't long, however, before the sound of gunfire is replaced with that of aircraft engines. For Lieutenant Nix, this sound means only one thing: Japanese aircraft have arrived to join the fray. Now facing two types of attack, the latest being one which the Kido Butai are highly proficient at, Lieutenant Nix knows he must act fast. With Edsall already on course to meet Chikuma, Nix increases the unpredictability of his maneuvers. The first bombs begin to fall into the waters around him as the naval gunfire continues. Finally, Lieutenant Nix's luck and that of his ship runs out. Despite his expert maneuvering, several of the dive bombers strike the destroyer's deck, igniting fires which rapidly spread throughout the ship. The force of near bomb misses damages her fragile steering and propulsion. Nix defiantly points Edsall's bow towards the Japanese heavy cruisers before withdrawing from his post to supervise his crew's escape. Now immobile and taking on water, Edsall's end has finally come. Kirishima and Chikuma position themselves to the destroyer's starboard and port. Firing first, Kirishima's 14-inch batteries erupt into the destroyer's side, and her secondaries also open fire. On the opposite side, so too did the primary and secondary armaments of Chikuma. Under this final barrage of fire, Edsall's defiant last stand is at an end, and she begins to descend beneath the waves. In the space of over 84 minutes, the small and antiquated USS Edsall has evaded the best efforts of 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, and 26 dive bombers. In the end, it would take the combined firing of 1,335 14, 8, 6, and 5-inch shells, and the dropping of 26 550-pound bombs to finally sink the destroyer. For the Japanese who recorded this battle, it would be used as a training aid on how not to attack a destroyer. The poor performance of their gun crews is not the result of poor training or equipment, but instead their tactics and the skill and tact with which Lieutenant Nix evaded them. The fate of Edsall's crew was unknown until after the war, as none were held in Japanese prisoner of war camps. During the post-war war crimes trial convened in Java by the Allies, investigators were led by eyewitnesses to execution grounds on the Celebes Islands. Here, 34 decapitated bodies were found. Of the bodies, 5 were from the Edsall, and another 5 were presumed to be of the US Army Air Force contingent aboard. Those of Edsall's crew who survived the battle were executed by the Japanese on the 24th of March 1942. The sinking of the USS Edsall was just another unfortunate loss in a long chain in the Dutch East Indies campaign that would culminate on the 9th of March 1942, when the island of Java was surrendered to the Empire of Japan. Thanks to our amazing patrons whose support enables us to make these videos. Thank you to all our new patrons who joined recently, and a special thanks to our patron of the week, Hunter Thor. Each week we choose our favourite Patreon comments to shout out. This week, Scott says, Lieutenant Nix and his men drove their ship to perfection in dodging the fire of the cruisers and battleships. The air attack was the deciding factor in the end. If you'd like to support us, please join our Patreon at patreon.com/the operations room and get access to exclusive benefits such as early access to videos ad and sponsor free. We would love to have you as part of our community and really appreciate your support.